Julio Enciso is heading on loan from Brighton to Kieran McKenna's Ipswich Town, and not only is this an exceptional signing, I also think it's a signing that could tip the balance between Ipswich being relegated and Ipswich surviving. So today we're going to sit down and analyse Enciso's game, looking at one of his traits that could be massive for Ipswich Town. We're also going to look at how he fits in at Ipswich and if he actually will be good enough to save McKenna's side from relegation. Now, we know Brighton are probably one of the best sides in Europe's top 5 leagues when it comes to developing players coming over from South America and arriving in Europe. I mean, we've seen them develop players like Moises Caicedo, Alexis McAllister, Pervis Estupinan, but for some reason, Julio Enciso hasn't really found his feet playing for Brighton. After joining the Seagulls at the age of 18, Enciso hasn't quite been on the same trajectory as the other players we mentioned, with him playing just 44 Premier League games since arriving at the Amex. However, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt because near the beginning of his second season at the club, he got a pretty nasty injury. He tore his meniscus, which left him on the sidelines for 184 days. So it absolutely has not been easy at all for the then 18-year-old and now 20-year-old to acclimatise to English football. I mean, moving across the world is hard enough as it is, but then when you get a pretty big injury early doors into your arrival, it makes things even harder. So, like I said, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and I feel like this move to Ipswich could be his real chance to really get going. Because, I mean, despite that injury and him having an overall tough time at getting into the Brighton team, he has still always been immaculate vibes whenever he's played. Whether that's him picking up the ball and hopping past players, with him averaging 2.6 successful take-ons per 90 over the last 365 days, or if it's him averaging a whopping 5.08 shots per 90 over that same time period. Julio Enciso has always brought something. He's never been boring. Now, what is interesting about them stats that we've just quickly looked at there is that these stats and overall Enciso's strengths kind of fall into more of a flair and chaotic kind of category when, and to be fair, we'll get into his stats in more depth a little bit later on, but looking at them and the kind of overall player he is, I feel like he fits into a team that gives him a little bit more autonomy. When he's playing, or when he was playing under De Zerbi at Brighton, everything was very rigid. It was about players being in certain positions at certain times, and he didn't necessarily have much freedom in possession. I know Herzler's a little bit different, but there's issues with that as well, and I'll touch on that later on in the video. But to kind of look back at the De Zerbi thing and how everyone was kind of expected to be in certain positions at exact times, it kind of took away what makes Enciso so special. I feel like that move to Ipswich, where I feel like McKenna will give him a lot more license to roam and that freedom, he will really, really thrive. So with that, what is Enciso actually like? We've done a lot of waffling about his career so far and his struggles and all that stuff, but what's he actually about? The Paraguayan is yet to really be defined by a set position because he has a really wide skill set. Throughout his career, he's played on the wing, as a centre forward, and as a number 10, with the latter position being the one I think Ipswich will look to play him in. The 20-year-old is exceptional in an attacking sense because of his explosive pace and intelligent movement, which if we look at his heat maps from the last 3 seasons at Brighton, we see him picking up the ball in the half spaces and the number 10 area. These spaces allow him to showcase his strengths the most. He can get on the ball with passes into his feet and turn under pressure, and he really, really does excel in these tight areas because of his really, really strong technical ability. If we look at this short passage of play here, Enciso hops onto the ball and instantly gets his body across using his low centre of gravity and low body strength to get straight across the defender. This gives him a small bit of space to look up and see that he's still got 3 Arsenal shirts around him, but he doesn't panic. He keeps his composure and doesn't just hoof it because Enciso lives for these moments. He wants to be in these positions to take players on. He again uses his body to manipulate the defenders with a little drop of the shoulder, and bang, he's gone past 3 players with absolute ease. Having him in these central positions where he will be receiving the ball under a lot of pressure and in tight areas is where he does really, really thrive. I mean, even if you throw him on the left wing, he's going to end up coming inside and operating in the left half space because he wants to get on the ball in them areas, because he wants to get on it, come inside onto that right foot and make things happen. Whether it is a shot from a million miles away, which we'll get on later on in the video, or if it's a slip and a little through ball through for an attacker, or if it's driving inside and just beating a few players centrally. The kind of in between the lines of midfield and defence is where Enciso operates at his best. Now, I think this is actually a really good thing for Ipswich, as not only can he do well against a high line because of his explosive pace and power to break through and getting beyond the defence, which I feel like could be really nice for Ipswich. Like, genuinely a really big plus of this signing is the fact that Enciso can out-shoulder some of that weight of running in behind that Liam Delap's had this season, and we know he loves and he dominates the channels, Delap, really well. But a lot of the time he's a little bit isolated, so bringing Enciso in could offer some support and lift a bit of his burden in terms of how much he's running. I mean, if we look at Delap's heat map against Fulham, we see he's constantly up and down and looking to get in behind through these wide areas. However, as good as Delap is in these scenarios, he is sometimes left without any options because of Ipswich absorbing a lot of pressure and utilising Delap as an outlet. This isolation of Delap, purely because Ipswich have so many players deep trying to defend, leaves the 21-year-old with no option than to take a lot of shots from tricky angles. His shot map shows he takes a high volume of shots from these kind of side areas that are really hard to score from. But why and how does Enciso actually come on and help Delap? How does he lift a bit of that kind of pressure that's on him to really be the sole man up top and the real big outlet for Ipswich? Well, with Enciso's bursting runs, he could easily drag defenders away from Delap, allowing him to run through on goal with less difficulty and maybe find more optimal shooting positions. Or we could also see him arriving late into the box, and when Delap's done all the hard stuff, taking on 3 players, pop down the wing, then he'll actually have someone to pass to rather than having to shoot from a tricky angle. And yes, don't get me wrong, Delap's finishing has been really solid this season. He's scored from these angles before and he's good in these areas. He is good in the box from these areas. But to make the most of the opportunities that Ipswich get going in behind, having more than just one option of Liam Delap do everything a lot of the time, it could really benefit Kieran McKenna's side. And I mean, Enciso loves a good shot, so I'm sure he'll be all up for it. But the kind of work that Enciso does to help Delap doesn't just stop with them runs going further forward and him acting as a supporting role, because I feel like he could also lift the progressive weight that is on Delap's shoulders. This season, Liam Delap ranks 4th in the Ipswich squad for progressive carries, with him sitting in the top 21% of forwards in Europe's top 5 leagues for progressive carries per 90, with 1.97. Now, up steps Enciso, and over the past few years, his ball carrying puts the Ipswich squad to absolute shame. Last season, he averaged 5.31 progressive carries per 90 and 3.22 successful take-ons per 90. He could massively come in and step into a role where he helps out the likes of Davis, Hutchinson, Delap, Wes Burns in terms of how much they're being asked to be a progressive ball carrier, carry them through the phases. It would also mean that Delap wouldn't always have to be the guy running at or in behind defenders, and instead he could have a supporting midfielder doing a lot of that work for him in counter-attacking moments. This would allow for Delap to prioritise his shooting and up his 1.97 shots per 90 this season to a much nicer figure. Speaking of shots though, we couldn't talk about this signing without talking about Enciso's obsession for having a crack. If we look at his last 3 seasons at Brighton, you see the crazy volume of shots he's having from midfield. This season, he's averaged 6.25 shots per 90. Last season, he averaged 5.32 shots per 90. And the season before, he averaged 4.28 shots per 90. The lad absolutely loves to have a pop, and although he actually does have a really nice strike on him, I mean, when you're taking a ridiculous amount of shots, as many as him, you expect a few to fly in. He does still have a superb goal catalogue, and I think the goal that he scored against Manchester City really showcases it. This goal here is everything that Enciso loves to do. He receives the ball in between the midfield and the defence like we talked about earlier. He takes it on the back foot with a really nice turn that takes the ball into open space, and then his next touch is him releasing a shot that flies into the top right corner from a long way out. Something I didn't mention before about Enciso is he does have the ability to complete actions really quickly. He can play first 2-touch football. He can also just get out of his feet in your player pass. He'll take a shot, which is nice for a team like Ipswich, who do not have a lot of the ball, so need to make the most of it when they have the ball. I think they have something like an average of 40% possession per game this season. So I think someone that comes into that midfield, into maybe a more attacking midfield position, and has a lot of duty on the ball, someone that can play quick passes, quick football, suits them really, really well, and that's exactly what Enciso can do. But this kind of long-distance shooting and the constant obsession with having a pop is obviously a blessing, but also a curse at the same time. Because yes, it's brilliant, you've got a good ball striker and someone who's brave enough to have a dig, but it also means you'll lose possession fairly often, and maybe instead of taking the passing option that you'd want, the ball will end up in the stands. However, I do think that in terms of the high volume of shots, the positives outweigh the negatives for Ipswich. This season, Ipswich have registered the 3rd least shots on target per match, so maybe having someone who will have a dig could help them just be more of an overall threat. I mean, shots on target in general can cause chances just by themselves, even if it is just a pop shot. All it takes is the keeper to spill it, and with the players like Liam Delap and Philogene Bidet sniffing around the 18-yard box, then anything could happen. And if them shots are coming in consistently, I do feel like someone like Liam Delap has the game know-how, he understands what's kicking about, and he'll get on a few rebounds from that. But outside of his ball carrying and his actual threat in front of goal and threat from the halfway line because he loves shooting that much, what else does Enciso bring that could kind of not necessarily mend Ipswich's attacking issues? Because considering the club that they are, where they've been, League One not too long ago, they're not doing ridiculously bad, but it's definitely not a strength for them in terms of they're not creating a lot of chances, they're not accumulating a lot of XG, they're not taking a lot of shots. So can he mend that in some other way outside of ball carrying and pop shots? Well, I'll be honest, he's not an out of this world passer with a lot of his good stuff coming from them driving runs, but he's still a competent passer and can provide them small sparks through his passing. Last season his pass completion rate sat at 74%, which isn't exceptional, but we've already kind of established he's a proper attacking minded player who isn't scared at all to take risks. However, despite that kind of poor passing range, which would probably suggest he's trying to play riskier balls, he only played 1.71 key passes per 90, yet he did complete 2.27 passes into the final third, and he also had 4.36 shot creating actions per 90 as well. Now, I know the shot creating actions don't have to be exclusively passes, but I do feel like it's important to include that in the video as well. Now, I do think there is a bit of creativity in his passing work, and his passing range is alright, his ideas and his intelligence within games is pretty good. It's just inconsistent. His passes aren't consistently great, which is what leads to him maybe giving the ball away, not having too high of a pass completion rate. But even with the inconsistencies, it still benefits Ipswich for a team who have created just 37 big chances this season. Even if he has them inconsistencies, I think that Enciso brings something that could be missing from that midfield. Because even when I look at that midfield, even players like Smodics and Chaplin, more so really, they are second striker types. Players who, yes, can drop in and get on the ball, but aren't, the big passing players. So Enciso probably has a bit more creativity about him than them two, if we're honest, in terms of passing. Moving away from the in-possession stuff though, and looking at how Enciso is out of possession, because that is a really big thing for Kieran McKenna's side, who although haven't managed to stop teams from scoring, do still do a lot of defensive work with the aim of staying in games as long as physically possible and doing a lot of their damage when transitioning from a deep defensive block to an attacking phase of play. Well, the 21-year-old isn't necessarily the world's hardest runner. He won't run for days and days and days, as in to the level that maybe Hersler wanted at Brighton. It's possibly why he hasn't managed to make himself a key player at the Seagulls, but he does still do more than enough for me off the ball. I still think he's a hard worker in a sense. He fights for balls, he competes in duels, and when he gets the ball back, we've already said, he can be really effective. To put it simply, he's not a defensive machine by any means, but he's still sat in the top 2% of midfielders in the Premier League, 4 blocks per 90. He isn't someone that's going to go out there and commit to every duel. He's not a Lewis Cook type at Bournemouth or a Ryan Christie or whoever you want to think of off the top of your head who's that proper fighter. But he does get himself in amongst it. And to be honest with you, when I look at Ipswich and think about how Enciso's going to be played, I don't think that he's going to be expected to really be a massive part of the out-of-ball work. I feel like a lot of his job is going to be similar to Delap in terms of stretching the defence a lot. A lot of the time when the ball's coming in transition, I feel like Enciso's going to be doing a lot of work in terms of ball carrying and pulling the defence away from Delap, which would mean that he's not going to spend a ridiculous amount of time inside of his own first phase, and instead a lot of his dueling will probably be through pressing, which Ipswich don't do a hell of a lot of. I think they've won the ball in the final third, something like the third least times in the league. And also, maybe he'll do a lot in the mid-third of the pitch, trying to win the ball back to hit teams on the break, which I think he will do quite well. Overall, though, I think like it was a bit of a shock to me. I didn't know Ipswich had the pull like that. And I mean, he's turned down, allegedly, United, Tottenham, Everton, because Kieran McKenna got on the blower. And when Kieran McKenna calls, you bloody answer, lads. Anyways, like I said, I feel like this overall makes a lot of sense. I think he fits the football McKenna's going to want to bring in. He will have a lot more autonomy to kind of pick up wide spaces, central spaces, come deep, extend beyond the lap. And I feel like he could be a signing that, especially if Wolves go on to lose Matheus Cunha, could just about keep Ipswich in the league. Keep that quiet though, yeah, we don't want people knowing. But if you did enjoy, lads, leave a like and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one. Let me know where you think Ipswich are going to finish this season. Peace.